Oh, it is. It is a Tuesday episode, and earlier than usual, but this is the time that we used to do months ago. So maybe it's not that big of an adjustment for some of you out there, but an earlier than usual episode of Donno Daily here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm still not doing the Chewbacca yell until my voice is back to 100%. Getting over these germs, my friends. We are going to be talking at 12:15 today with Brady Hawk, the hardest working man at 5reasonsports.com. Get down to business on a tough road loss last night, the Miami Heat in Cleveland. The Cleveland Cavaliers, by the way, they are, maybe the record doesn't tell this story, but in one area, the Cleveland Cavaliers are an absolute juggernaut. They have been a juggernaut for sports bettors that have been backing them to beat the spread. We talked about this with our guy Nick from the Daily Stakes yesterday. The Cleveland Cavaliers now, I believe it's a full dozen, 12 in a row games when they've covered the spread. That is remarkable. And I think you're going to keep seeing the spreads get a little bit higher and higher or closer and closer in the games that they're not necessarily supposed to win. They won't have them losing by much because the Cavaliers, if you've kept betting on them and doubling down on them, you'd probably be a millionaire right now. But it's the Cavaliers, so you probably haven't been betting on them 12 straight times. It is what it is. It comes with the territory. But I think the secret is out. The secret from Las Vegas is out. The Cavaliers are a juggernaut. Unfortunately, they covered that spread at the expense of our Miami Heat yesterday. So, yeah, we're going to be taking you guys for roughly the next hour here on Donno Daily on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I want to talk some Canes because Tyler Van Dyke, TVD, is starting to get a lot of love now. And it's not just for me, right? A couple months ago, I turned my Twitter account into a Tyler Van Dyke appreciation account. Anybody who was actually watching Miami Hurricanes games week after week from late October on know how special that young quarterback is. But America, no, the world are now taking notice as to how special Tyler Van Dyke is. But before we get to the meat and the potatoes of the conversations, I want to remind you guys that we are served, as always, by the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. The Quarterdeck has the freshest seafood you will ever find. They've got 2-for-1 happy hour all day, every day. It is an awesome spot to watch all the games and all the big fights. They have the UFC pay-per-view fights for zero cover charge, by the way. I hope you checked out UFC 269 this past weekend at the Quarterdeck. And how about this, guys? 5 Reasons Sports fans, Donno Daily viewers, we will see you guys out at the Quarterdeck Davy tomorrow night. We are having a very special Miami Heat at Philadelphia 76ers watch party tomorrow. I'm going to be out there by 7 o'clock tomorrow night. I love the fact that it's an early game, an early-ish game, because the last time we had a watch party, last couple times, it's been like later at night. 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And guys, you show up to this watch party tomorrow at the Quarterdeck Davy. Not only do you get to meet people like Ethan Skolnick and myself and Brady Hawk, you have a chance to leave the Quarterdeck $500 richer. That's right, my friends. You can play the ASX Sports app for a chance to win $500 freaking dollars. You can leave with a little extra cash in your pocket tomorrow night. So if you want to check us out at the Quarterdeck Davy, you want to see the menu before you go, there's so much awesome food you can have at the Quarterdeck. Visit them on the web at quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. So we'll see you guys out there at 7 o'clock tomorrow night for the Miami Heat Philadelphia 76ers. I cannot wait because I couldn't go to the last watch party, I think late in November, because I had a whole babysitting fiasco, had to stay home with my kid. And I didn't bring him out there because he goes to bed at like 8 o'clock, so that wouldn't have really worked out. But I'm all free and clear tomorrow night, my friends. And I want to remind you, we are brought to you by the official sports book of Donno Daily. That is BetUS.com. BetUS is America's favorite sports book. They are the 3-decade leader. BetUS is in their 27th NFL season. I love betting the NFL games at BetUS.com. They've also got a full casino right there on the website. It's like having Las Vegas in your pocket on your smartphone or on your computer as well. And yes, you can use it in Florida, my friends. You can use this full-service sports book in Florida, no problem whatsoever. And make sure when you sign up at BetUS.com with our code 5RSN125. Sign up with our show code 5RSN125 when you make your deposit, and they're going to give you the best bonus in the industry. You're not going to find a bonus like this anyplace else. They're going to give you a 125% sign up bonus. So if you deposit $100 when you sign up, let's say, they're going to give you $125 in free play money on top of your deposit, and you can bet sports, casino, horses, pop culture props, and more at betus.com. They are America's favorite sports book. Their customer service is second to none. So check it out, betus.com. You bet, you win, you get paid. betus.com. Apparently, I'm mushing Tyler Van Dyke now. Am I mushing all the Tylers? I've mushed Tyler Hero, apparently. I definitely mush Will Fuller. That one is not up for debate because Will Fuller has been stealing money his 1 year as a Miami Dolphin. So now I'm mushing Tyler Van Dyke. Tyler Van Dyke, what an incredible run to end the Miami Hurricanes football season. Had a 6-game streak of at least 300 yards passing. And those who were really paying attention realized TV Dimes was the guy carrying Miami. It wasn't Manny Diaz's coaching. Certainly wasn't Manny Diaz's defense because those guys couldn't stop a nosebleed. They couldn't tackle to save their lives. It was the Rhett Lashley play calling, and it was TV Dinner delivering dimes all over the freaking field. Here's some of Tyler Van Dyke's numbers coming off of last year, and he only played in 10 games last season. Van Dyke completed 62.3% of his passes. That's almost Tua Tagovailoa good. 62.3% of his passes completed, 2,931 yards, 25 touchdowns against just 6 interceptions in 10 games played. Pro Football Focus graded out TVD with a 79.6 passing grade over the final 6 games of the regular season. That ranked 13th best in the country among quarterbacks with at least 200 dropbacks. Van Dyke threw for the 7th most yards of any quarterback in the country during that stretch, and the 20 touchdowns he tossed during those final 6 games was tied for 6th most in the country. And now, if you guys think that I'm the mush, I hope David Hale and ESPN aren't actually the ones who are the mush, because now, according to ESPN and David Hale, now that we've given out this year's Heisman to Bryce Young at Alabama, you already start to, as soon as you give out the Heisman for 2021, you already start to have conversations about the Heisman Trophy for 2022. And Tyler Van Dyke is considered an early name to know, is the way that they put it. This is an early guy on the watch list heading into next year. He lists as David Hale, Tyler Van Dyke. He considers him as a quote-unquote player to keep an eye on for the 2022 Heisman Trophy, listing him in a category called the up-and-comers. And he was the headliner of the up-and-comers category. So I guess he's the most up-and-coming of the up-and-comers. This is what Hale had to say about Miami's Tyler Van Dyke. Quote, "To say Miami fans are excited about 2022 would be like saying Ed Reed played hard." It's true, just a massive understatement, he says. And yes, new AD Dan Radakovich and new head coach Mario Cristobal are big reasons for all the enthusiasm in Coral Gables, but perhaps the biggest piece to the puzzle is Tyler Van Dyke, who came on as a replacement, they write, for De'Aaron King in September and quickly blossomed into one of the country's most prolific passers. Van Dyke ended the season by throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I forgot to mention that part of the streak. I mentioned the streak of 300-yard games. I forgot to mention the streak of all the touchdowns. 300 yards plus and 3 touchdowns in 6 straight games, winning 5 of them. Now, we all remember the one that Miami lost during that stretch. That was that Florida State game. And, you put that a lot more on Miami's coaching than you put it a lot more on Miami's quarterbacking. Even though Tyler Van Dyke, we remember the first half of the Florida State game was not very good. But 4th and 14, the conservative play calling, not letting Florida State score, managing your timeouts incorrectly. That was why Miami lost that Florida State game. It wasn't really on Tyler Van Dyke. And they point out in this piece, and this made all the sense in the world, when our boy, Mario Cristobal, officially took that Miami job last week. And we know Mario. This guy takes a job, he starts working like that. Snap of the finger. He's immediately working. He's immediately out recruiting. He's recruiting the class of 2022. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, because there are some names you're hoping to sneak in on before early National Signing Day comes and passes tomorrow. Then you, of course, got the late National Signing Day in February, but most guys sign in December these days before February. So when Cristobal arrived, not only did Mario immediately hit the recruiting trail to try and fortify the class of 22, he also had to do some internal recruiting, right? Because we know this, the modern era of college football, what it's become the last couple of years. And I'm not complaining, right? Because I think we're moving more towards a system that benefits the athletes. And the athletes are the ones that, have been, unpaid. I was going to say underpaid, but really unpaid. I know you have name, image, and likeness now, but these guys have been the ones who have been exploited for a very long time. And now we've made it more athlete friendly because they're able to transfer from school to school now with little to no penalty, which wasn't the case up until very recently. So whenever you make a coaching change, even if it's an obvious upgrade, because going from Manny Diaz to Mario Cristobal is a very obvious upgrade. Although congratulations to Manny for landing on his feet at Penn State. I am legitimately happy for him. For as much as I may have criticized, sorry about my cough, for as much as I may have criticized Manny Diaz as a head coach and a game day coach, as a defensive coordinator, the guy has been dynamite, was dynamite at Miami. I'm glad he landed on his feet and he gets to go coach up the defense of the Penn State Nittany Lions. But even when you make an obvious upgrade at head coach, like Miami did going from Diaz to Cristobal, you're still going to have to do recruiting within that locker room because these guys were accustomed to playing for Manny Diaz. They liked Manny Diaz. They seemed to enjoy the routines that they'd gotten into with Manny Diaz. And you don't know where you stand with the next guy, right? When the next guy comes in, if you're a starter right now, you're thinking, I was a starter under Manny Diaz. I was one of Manny Diaz's guys. What if Cristobal doesn't look at me the same way that Manny Diaz does? So that meeting, the first interaction that Cristobal had with his players at Miami, the existing players at Miami, was incredibly important to kind of read the room and give these guys a sense what the next regime is going to be like. And when Cristobal took over, one of the first guys that he reached out to for obvious reasons is Tyler Van Dyke, because you want to make sure Van Dyke is good here. He's not thinking about leaving. He's not thinking about taking his talent somewhere else. And he understands he is going to be the focal point of the next offense. He will be the focal point of the Mario Cristobal offense. Now, we're still yet to see who the offensive coordinator is going to be. And I'm waiting with bated breath to see where Miami goes on that one. It's not going to be Joe Brady. Unfortunately, he's focused on staying in the National Football League, even after getting fired by Carolina. Some people have talked about Ken Dorsey. I'd love to have Dorsey, and he and Cristobal are tight because Cristobal was, a coach on the staff when Dorsey played here. And, they're both Miami guys. So I'd love to have Dorsey down here. I have my doubts if he would come because Dorsey, to me, with the way he's been moving up the ladder in the National Football League, right? The work that he's done, quarterbacks coach from Carolina to Buffalo, passing game coordinator. You would think kind of the next stop for Dorsey, if you're going up that chain, would be offensive coordinator in the National Football League. So would he be willing to take a different career path? I know he did spend that random ass year as FIU's assistant athletic director. I still don't really understand why he did that, but I don't know if I don't know. Dorsey, kind of like Joe Brady, he might be focused on the pros. We will see. I've seen Bryles thrown in there as a possibility. Obviously, there's a little bit of controversy that comes with that one. So we'll see which way Miami goes, but it goes without saying one of the first people that Mario Cristobal reached out to when he got this job was Tyler Van Dyke. So let's talk about kind of the early thoughts for the Heisman Trophy next year and what it would take to keep Tyler Van Dyke in that conversation, because obviously we read to you his numbers from this past season. And if you just consider the fact that he goes from being a redshirt freshman this past year who didn't expect to play. I know that he's a professional. He prepares like he's going to play every single practice, but you thought it was going to be the De'Aaron King show for 2021. I don't know if Tyler Van Dyke seriously considered the possibility that he was going to be Miami's starting quarterback for the majority of this season. As a redshirt freshman, he put up tremendous freaking numbers. We know that. This guy would fall out of bed and put up video game numbers. It was incredible what Tyler Van Dyke did this past year. And if he goes up that growth curve, right, and you consider some of the talented receivers, the young receivers he was throwing to, unfortunately, you lose Rambo and Harley. But when you think about the Keyshawn Smiths, the Xavier Restrepos, Jacoby George, Will Mallory is coming back to play tight end, and you've got Elijah Arroyo at tight end as well, and you've got plenty of bodies, assuming we get healthy guys back in the running back room, because the running back room was not healthy this past year. He's going to have a ton of talent to throw the football to and hand the football off to. So I do not worry. From a Tyler Van Dyke standpoint, I think he's going to have the numbers. He's going to have the highlight reel, and he's going to have the type of efficiency that you would expect from a Heisman candidate quarterback. I do not doubt for 1 second that Tyler Van Dyke is going to put up stats and numbers and wow type of plays that are good enough to get him in that Heisman conversation. I think the only question here is, because they don't, no matter what kind of numbers you put up as a quarterback, they don't tend to give out the Heisman Trophy to quarterbacks of 7-5, 6-6, even 8-4 type of teams. I mean, I don't think there's any secret as to why we see, quarterbacks from places like Alabama and Ohio State and Clemson winning Heisman trophies, because these guys are putting up monster numbers and they're winning a lot of games and they're getting to college football playoffs and they're competing for national championships. So I think with TVD, despite his ridiculous freaking numbers, really over a 6-game stretch, this guy putting up almost 3,000 passing yards, 25 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions, 62.3% completions. He's got the arm, he's got the smarts, he's got the talent to be in that conversation. I think the only question is Miami going to be good enough, relevant enough, and win enough games to get him to New York City for that Heisman ceremony? And I'd be lying to you if I say that's something I would be counting on, right? I think Miami's going to get better under Mario Cristobal and the staff he's putting together and the young players that really showed out this past year. A lot of these guys were true freshmen and redshirt freshmen. So there's no question to me Miami is going to get better. But are they going to go in 1 year from 7-5 to 10 or 11 wins and be knocking on that door of a college football playoff? I'm hesitant to say they are. And I don't want you people to hear me say that and interpret that as me saying, I don't think Mario Cristobal is going to do a lot of winning here. Obviously I do, but I'm going to be very patient for the first season. I'm going to let him be on scholarship for the first season. First season under Mario Cristobal. Do I expect Miami to get better? 7-win regular season team this past year. I'm looking for 9 next year. Like, I'm looking to be 9, maybe knocking on the door for 10 wins next year. And I think Tyler Van Dyke is going to be fantastic. He's going to be dynamite. He's going to be electric. I just don't know if Miami is going to be enough for TVD to put himself right into that Heisman conversation. You think about some other guys who are going to be in it. Caleb Williams, the quarterback from Oklahoma. Now, another name whose team might not be good enough, and another team that made a coaching upgrade, but it may take some time, Jackson Dart, the quarterback from USC. I kind of put him in that same cat, and I think TVD is better. But as far as the teams around him, I put him in that same category. Braylon Allen, the running back from Wisconsin. Sean Tucker, the running back from Syracuse. People are even talking about Will Anderson, the linebacker from Alabama. I have a hard time seeing them giving it to a linebacker. He could be in that conversation, though, as well. And speaking of Bama, I'm not going to forget Bryce Young, who just won the Heisman. Will Bryce Young repeat? History would say otherwise. Nobody has done that since Archie Griffin. Played a very long time ago. Archie Griffin from Ohio State, the only 2-time repeat Heisman Trophy winner. So I think it's going to be tough for Bryce to win that one again, but anything is possible. What up, by the way, to Marco, Mr. T's Culture. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's go out and bring in our first guest of the day. I'm bitter. I'm sour from losing in Cleveland. The Cleveland Cavaliers have owned the Miami Heat. And Brady Hawk, I do understand the Heat were not playing with a full deck of cards last night. But, I mean, I'm sure you've been following. I don't know if you're a degenerate like I am, but the Cleveland Cavaliers have been a pretty incredible story in the betting space because they've covered the spread, I think, 12 straight times now. Low-key, the Cleveland Cavaliers, they've been a juggernaut when it comes to covering spreads.
Yeah, and they've been pretty much a juggernaut on the court as well. As we see, they're one of the most unique teams there are in the NBA right now. Like we were talking about last night with the length, and I'm sure we'll get into how that impacted this game, but there aren't many other teams like Cleveland. Like there isn't a team like Cleveland that has 3 basically 7-footers in their starting lineup. And when you're talking about Miami kind of struggling against this type of team, you're not really worried about it unless Miami sees Cleveland in a playoff series, because other than them, the only team I can think of that's close to them is Milwaukee, and they're not close to them at all, because even if they get Brook back, the lengthiest they'll go is Brook Lopez and Giannis in the lineup, Portis and Giannis in the lineup. So it's even that they can kind of go around. But Cleveland is unique, and we saw it last night.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And let's talk about, who the Miami Heat were missing last night. We'll get to it, but I'm not going to start with Bam and Jimmy because that's so obvious.
Yeah.
But what about Caleb Martin? I mean, Brady, I feel bad for this guy because right before he goes into the COVID protocol, he had the game of his life,
Yeah.
3 games ago. He's been unable or unallowed to play these last couple of games. How much was Caleb Martin missed last night?
Yeah, I feel like that you wouldn't think a two-way player, you being without a two-way player does not seem like a big deal, but with the state of the Miami Heat right now, with the guys you mentioned they have out, he's a big deal. Like, I feel like Miami would have been in that game late if they had Caleb Martin. He would have 100% have been starting. He gives you a little bit more length than Gabe Vincent. You could use Gabe off the bench in a different way. He is a big deal. Like, they had to go straight 9-man rotation like they always do, but the thing is they don't get to change those 9 guys. Like, the 9 guys are the 9 guys. You have to trust KZ Okpala. You have to trust Omer Yurtseven. They've trusted one of those guys, it seems like, most nights, but you have to trust both of them when you're without a guy like Caleb Martin. And it was a big deal. I think it says a lot about Caleb as a player. Like you mentioned, he just had the game of his life before that. You can use that scoring punch. They can't really go to a zone as much because when you're without Caleb Martin, you don't have anybody to really go to the 2-2-1 press because, as I mentioned, he's kind of like Andre Iguodala was last season, where he was the guy next to Gabe in that 2-2-1 press. Now Caleb kind of inserted in there. There's not really anybody you can use there. PJ Tucker is not going to be pressing full court. Even though he probably could, they're not going to use up that energy from him, especially when he's their only offense on the night.
Brady Hawk from 5reasonsports.com is with us here on Donno Daily on 5R YouTube. So, all right, let's get more in depth. In addition to Caleb Martin, Bam Adebayo still out after having surgery. Jimmy Butler's still out with a tailbone. Markieff Morris out as well. So when you talk about the length, which Cleveland really weaponizes their length so well, obviously, even if the Heat had the 3 players I mentioned available, the 4 players I mentioned, including Caleb Martin, they wouldn't be able to go toe for toe, length to length. But how much better equipped with a full deck of cards would the Heat be to counteract the Cleveland length?
Yeah, it would be huge if we go by player. The Bam would make the biggest difference just because Dedmon can handle himself. Like, we know Dedmon can handle himself on the post, and we saw that last night. But he's the ultimate complementary piece defensively for a team like Cleveland. Like, last night, he was it. He was all they had. That was it. They didn't have a Dedmon to bring in behind him and kind of mess things up. He was basically it. You look across the roster, Tyler Hero having to see more and more focus. The Cleveland team is focused on him. And as I said before with Tyler, he's been able to kind of go around so many things defensively. He's been a drop coverage dissector from the minute he came into the NBA. He's figured out switches. He's figured out blitzes. He's figured out doubles. The one thing we've seen him kind of look a little off against is the length of Cleveland. In 2 games against Cleveland, he had a bit of an off game against Milwaukee, maybe a little bit to do with the length. I'm not exactly sure. But we've seen his ability to kind of, when they focus in on that, they put Lauri Markkanen on him on the perimeter. They force him in, funnel him into the lane to 2 more bigs awaiting. Like, you're seeing a clear plan against Tyler Hero. And we see on the perimeter that the way he uses separation, as I've said time and time again, is the high release point. He rises up over any defender he has. You can't rise over the top of an Evan Mobley. You can't rise over the top of a Jared Allen. So it's just a different type of beast playing a Cleveland team. But like I said before, this is the only time you're going to see it because there isn't teams like Cleveland, honestly. Like, you may see teams see Hero struggling against length, and maybe they throw a versatile big on him once in a while to see how he responds. But other than that, there just won't be this type of matchup often.
So, Brady, anything new on the timetables as far as, I don't know if anything has really changed with Bam, but what about with Jimmy? And what about with, is there any word on how Caleb is doing in that protocol?
Yeah, there's been no information on Caleb specifically, which is a little bit interesting. It feels like, especially Miami, they'll probably keep it in-house, and you'll hear pre-game of a game in a week or so that they'll be like, oh, Caleb Martin's playing. He's available. The thing with Jimmy, it was reported by Ethan that they could return possibly. They don't know when, but they could return at some point in the road trip, which it would make sense. They do play Orlando coming up soon. So this road trip is weird, by the way, because they bounce around from city to city in a very weird way. But when they come down to Orlando, maybe they can make the trip. It's an easy trip up there. Maybe Jimmy can slide in. But it's also, this is the easiest part of the schedule coming up after tomorrow night against Philly. It gets real easy. Maybe they ease them in even more if they trust their team against an Orlando Magic team and all these other easy teams. We'll see how it goes, but it doesn't seem like we have any true update on the injury status.
And speaking of timetables, because one name I haven't mentioned, is there any sort of clarity on Victor Oladipo?
No, there wasn't. But the one thing that was a good sign was that he was made his first road game yesterday.
Right.
He made the road trip. This is his first time, and that's a great sign. Like we could talk about things. They talk about acclimating him. They're only acclimating him because it's getting real close. And we look at Victor Oladipo, and I think we now, because it's been so long, we just look at him as a name. But man, if he plugs into this roster, and I know we talk about the percentage he's going to be at, maybe he's not all the way. This team could very well use Victor Oladipo right now with the state that they were in last night. If you plug Victor Oladipo into that type of thing, another initiator, another attacker, another potential catch and shoot guy, which his numbers rise every time he comes back from injury. A potential lengthier defender. If we're talking about lengthier defenders like Caleb Martin, Victor Oladipo may not be his same speed, but he's still lengthy and quick and smart enough on the defensive end to make an impact. Like, we're getting real close, and they could really use him. It's almost like they're going to be – he's their trade acquisition. Like, we don't know what the trade market will be like, but he's basically a sign and trade guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at, I mean, there's going to be a couple of those, right? Because Oladipo, and then we could probably look at Bam the same way. When Bam comes back, it's going to be probably, maybe hopefully a little bit before, but around the trade deadline. Basically. So those are going to feel like the additions the Heat make around deadline time. Let's close the door on the Cleveland game, because we talked about a couple of important things. Obviously, who the Heat were without, the unique matchup going up against Cleveland's length that makes it very difficult. So beyond those two very big factors, what are your other biggest takeaways, negative or positive? Because some of the things that stood out to me were, if you're going to win a game like that last night, your three-point shooting has to be extraordinary, and it wasn't. They got, outscored by 9 points on three-pointers. Also, just completely woeful in getting to the free throw line and making their free throws. So, I mean, you can expand on those, but do any other factors stand out to you from a negative or positive sense from last night?
Yeah, you hit on it right there. I looked at through the game, throughout the entire game, field goal percentage, field goal attempts, 3-point attempts, everything was neck and neck this entire game, which is weird because the lead never seemed too close in those stretches, but everything was neck and neck. The only thing that was off was the free throws. The free throw attempts were off the charts with Miami compared to Cleveland. And if you look at the roster last night, look at the 9-man rotation, none of those guys on paper are guys that are going to draw fouls reliably. Like, you're not looking at many of those guys to say Kyle Lowry's the only one, but at this stage of his career, that's not his game. He's not taking a toll in a regular season game against Cleveland to try to rack up some free throws. So that did stand out. I don't think that's a big deal because it's kind of expected coming into a game when you're without your two highest free throw guys already. But from a positive note, like, PJ Tucker deserves some credit. Like, looking at last night, there was a lot of negative things. But for PJ Tucker, I think he was 6 minutes in. He was 3 for 7 from the field and 2 for 4 from three. He was 3 for 7 from the field and 2 for 4 from three in the entire last game against Chicago. Wow. Like, he really stepped up in that way, and it felt like Cleveland's a perfect matchup for him overall because they have to put a big on him, and if he stands in the corner, the big's not going to stay all the way out there in the corner. He's going to get easy three-point looks. He did that last night. But the expansion of his game, like, you don't expect veterans like him to come in and expand his game in that type of way, that he's an inside mid-range threat now, like a legitimate mid-range threat with that floater, that it feels like it's 100% when he does that one-handed thing down low. Like, just seeing him expand in that way, his enthusiasm every single play, like, he steps out of bounds when the ball goes out and he looks like he wants to just absolutely punch something and punch the goal. Like, he is so enthusiastic in these games that they miss this defensively. They always talk about his voice on that end. That is not an overstatement. If you watch these games, just watch his arm pointing, dunking to go this way. He steps up and switches. Like, he does things that you just don't really notice. But last night was a game that you just notice it immediately just because of the points he's putting up. And if you can get that PJ Tucker, one game in a seven, he was awesome. But if you get that PJ Tucker one game in a 7-game series, you are going to be in a very good spot in this postseason.
Dude, I love PJ Tucker, and I love the fact that Brady, I think Miami is probably where he's most appreciated because, and I know, like, I'm a huge fan of his. I know our pal Alana Tahauer is probably his #1 fan, but it's like people in Miami, they appreciate everything PJ Tucker does because of the whole culture thing. I think he's more appreciated in Miami than he would be and has been in any other NBA market.
He definitely fits. Like, when people talk about culture and use that word, and you can take it how you want it if people don't really love the term culture, but he is the definition of it if you want to look for a guy. Like, think back to the media day. Pat Riley kind of braces over a lot of the guys he talks about. He went on like a 2 to 3 minute tangent on PJ Tucker, just talking about how amazing it was. And everybody's like, he's kind of talked about PJ probably triple the time he talked about Kyle Lowry or talked about Jimmy Butler. This is the reason. Like, he does everything the Miami Heat love. Spoelstra after last night's game was talking about, he always talks about him guarding 1 through 5. And he said he would love if he could have guarded all 5 positions on the same play. Like, this team, just the coaching staff, the players, they all trust him. I've called them before. Miami needed a point guard. They needed an initiator on the offensive side. PJ Tucker is the Kyle Lowry of this defense. Like, they missed it. He's basically, you can't really see it now because they're without their 2 best defenders. But when those guys are in, you're going to see a totally different defense with the way PJ can kind of orchestrate things.
And I know Eric Spoelstra was frustrated about this over the weekend with the NBA protocols on COVID, and I can totally understand why people would be frustrated, because like the NBA, I think overall they've been more aggressive on this than most sports leagues have. As far as their not only their protocol for players missing games, not missing games, but vaccinations. I mean, obviously there are a few players in the league who are outliers who have resisted the vaccine, but for the most part, and I believe the Heat are 100% vaccinated. So it's like, I can kind of understand when he says that, hey, like if we're following this and everybody's vaccinated and then a player still has to sit out when they're asymptomatic, but they're testing positive and they're not canceling games. So it's like, shouldn't it be one or the other, right? Because like in the Heat, to me, very fortunate that it's still only Caleb Barton in the protocol, because a ton of Bulls were in the protocol over the weekend, and then more players were added to it after they played the Heat. So I feel like Miami really dodged a bullet there. But do you think, Brady, with the way that things are going, because I see more and more players around the league now are being affected, by Omicron and whatever other strains may be out there, do you think we might see a temporary stoppage in play at some point, or just more games called off or postponed?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I feel like maybe January would be a good time, because that feels like when everything's going to flood in after the holidays, and after all that happens, that would be a time.
And also, as people have pointed out here in our comments, you make sure you get the Christmas games in for the TV ratings, and then after that, you take a step back. Yeah,
exactly. I think, to go back to your Spoelstra point, I think the reason he had that point of view after that game, a lot of it was because not only are they 100% vaccinated, but they're also 100% boosted. So was, I felt like, had an impact that he was just talking about that. But ultimately, he can't be mad at anybody else other than the league. Like, we talk about that game against Chicago. People were talking about it. They should have not played that game. And it feels like a rerun of last season when they played Washington. And then all of a sudden, Miami had the breakout after that. But after that game, Washington then gets their weekly games canceled. The same thing happens here. They play against Chicago, and then all of a sudden now Chicago's not playing their next 2 games. That would probably be the thing that would probably anger them most, that they have to they're basically the guinea pigs in that instance, that now they have a Caleb Martin drop. And who knows, maybe something else will come up, down the line. It doesn't mean that it can't happen now. But it is good that they squeaked down and didn't have anybody else, and they were able to play last night. And they're already limited. Like, if you had 1 or 2 more guys drop into the protocols, they're going to be in a similar spot as the Bulls. Like, they don't really have enough bodies. You talk about empty roster spots there without Bam and Jimmy. We talk about Victor Oladipo returning, but he's a roster spot right now, and they're not going to have him. So it's just going to be interesting the way to go about it. To answer your question, I do feel like maybe a 2-week pause wouldn't be the worst thing in January. I don't know if they'll actually do it. Maybe it'll ease out, but it does not feel like this type of thing with the protocols and everything is going anywhere.
Well, excellent work as always. Let people know what to expect to see, because you are the hardest working man on 5reasonsports.com. What can they expect on the website from you the rest of the week?
Yeah, so today I had a film breakdown on Twitter, just like the length of Cleveland and going over the plays, 5 takeaways after every game. And I also have a newer piece on the defense possibly shifting when Bam comes back to a different type of scheme and the way they go about things.
I love it. Excellent work as always. Brady Hawk. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at BradyHawk305. Check out his work all over 5reasonsports.com and on 5 on the Floor as well. Brady, thank you so much, man. Enjoy the game tomorrow night. By the way, I hope to see you out at the quarterdeck, man. Now I can't buy you a beer because you're not of age yet. I'll buy you a Sprite or something if you come out.
A juice box.
I've got plenty of those at home for my kid.
I bet you do. Appreciate you having me on.
I love it. Awesome stuff there as always from Brady Hawk. And one thing I forgot to ask him was how I don't know if it's changed since last time we spoken to him because he covers some home games, he doesn't cover other home games. How his record is because the team tends to do they do a lot better the Heat on the games that Brady Hawk covers at the arena than the games Ethan Skolnick covers at the arena. Might Ethan Skolnick be a little bit of a mush? Could that be? I know I'm the one who gets called the mush. Maybe Ethan Skolnick might be even more of a mush than me. You guys know if you follow college football, we are, a little bit over 24 hours away from the early National Signing Day tomorrow, December 15th. We're going to be covering that very, very heavily on tomorrow's show. We're going to be back to the 3 p.m. time tomorrow. My attitude heading into early National Signing Day oh, by the way, I've been told, stop doing that. You are the mush. Am I the only? Well, I'm Mush Senior. Our guy, Michael Christian, also has some mushing powers. He's Mush Junior. So Mush Senior, Mush Junior. And then on Thursdays, we bring on Barry Barger, who is the anti-mush, right? But no, my attitude heading into early National Signing Day as a Miami fan, obviously you do feel some pressure because there are a couple of battleground players that you're fighting over. Overall, though, you have to understand the context of your situation. Your new head coach has been at his job for literally a week. He's been at this, Mario Cristobal, for a week. Now, with the amount of money he's getting paid, of course, that comes with an expectation. With the hype surrounding Mario, specifically in the avenue of recruiting, right? He's consistently renowned as one of the top 3 or 4 recruiting coaches in the entire country. His old boss, Nick Saban, referred to him a few years back when Cristobal was at Alabama as the #1 recruiter in the country. People know his reputation. They know how hard he works out there in the living rooms, whining and dining the parents and schmoozing and all that. We know how good Mario Cristobal is at all that stuff. So that comes with an expectation as well. I'm just telling you, do yourself a favor and go into National Signing Day, early National Signing Day tomorrow, just preparing for not a whole lot to happen. And then whatever happens, it's the icing on the cake, right? Because you got to remember, for as good of a job as Manny Diaz and his staff did with the class of 2021, there was virtually nothing with the class of 2022. In fact, arguably your biggest, or at least one of your biggest commits, actually committed after the coaching change was made, talking about linebacker Wesley Besaint, right? So you can, obviously most of that work was put in by the previous staff, but maybe you could say Mario Cristobal pushed that one over the finish line. Nigel Kelly, though, is a player that I am absolutely expecting to land tomorrow, the 4-star defensive lineman, Nigel Kelly. It looks like he is going to be solid, and that you can give that almost entirely to Mario Cristobal. So I think that's going to be a really good one. You might be able to land offensive lineman Malik Agbo as well. So just go into tomorrow hoping for the best, but expecting not a whole lot to happen because we've known it. Even if Manny Diaz hadn't been fired, we knew that this was going to be a light recruiting class because they couldn't apparently capture the lightning in the bottle, the previous staff that they had in 2021 when they brought in a massive class and a quality class. They couldn't recapture that magic for 2022. Before the coaching change was made, Manny Diaz and his staff only had 8 commits for signing day, and none of them were South Florida-based players, right? So we know that the bulk of the work that Cristobal and his staff are doing here, they're going to try and get a few extra guys committed tomorrow and then February, because you also have an opportunity for, the next National Signing Day. And you're going to have to work that transfer portal, right? We're going to see if Mario Cristobal can do the art form that Manny Diaz really perfected, because that was something that Diaz was really good at. When it comes to working the transfer portal, we'll see what Mario can get done in that transfer portal as well, because we knew this class would come down to a lot of that, my friends. So, yeah, I'm totally expecting to land Nigel Kelly tomorrow. We're also going to be looking at, and this is one, he's not being crystal balled to Miami, okay? Crystal ball. He's not being crystal balled to Miami, but Miami has emerged since Cristobal took over as a contender for 4-star cornerback Earl Little Jr. So his father played at Miami 93 to 96, so he is a Miami legacy. Earl Little has been considered pretty much a solid Alabama commit, but Miami has kind of snuck in the back door. Cristobal had what, by all accounts, according to the father and others, was a really good in-home visit with Earl Little this past week. So I don't know, maybe Earl Little Sr. kind of decides, maybe now would be the time to kind of nudge my son in the direction of playing for the university that I played at back in the 1990s. And maybe Mario can do a little bit of magic there. Miami does have, even if Earl Little most likely winds up at Bama, but that's something I'm going to be watching out for. And guys, how poetic would it be if Mario Cristobal, the former apprentice of Nick Saban, can actually outduel, the student becomes the teacher. If he can outduel Nick himself for a player like that, it would be fantastic. So that would be great if he can come. Even if Earl Little Jr. does not come, Miami does have commitments already from 4-star corners in Chris Graves and Kamari Rogers. So you're okay, even if Little doesn't come. But if Little did come, you think about getting Earl Little Jr., Kamari Rogers, and Chris Graves in the same class, you would be becoming defensive back you again. It would start to look, like, the types of defensive backs you were recruiting and getting commitments from like 20, 25 years ago. It would be unfreaking believable, man. So these are some of the battleground players to watch out for. Oh, another one to watch out for is a 4-star wide receiver who is pretty consistently getting crystal ball predictions to Florida State. But wide receiver Kevin Coleman, he's the 9th-ranked wide receiver, top-ranked in the state of Missouri, according to Rivals.com. And he has emerged potentially as a guy who could go to Miami, even though he's been favoring Florida State. All signs are pointing to Florida State because he really, really liked Cristobal at Oregon. And I think the factor why he wasn't so solid to Oregon before Cristobal came here was he didn't really want to go to Eugene. But now that Cristobal is in Miami, it could be a different story, and Miami could compete with Florida State. Now, Florida State has been hot on this player for a long time, and it's been kind of considered almost a sure thing for him to wind up at Florida State. So Miami is playing catch up here. But that would be a great one. And listen, wide receiver is another position where Miami's pretty good right now, right? You got a lot of young talent at wide receiver, players that I talked about early on in the show. I mean, you think about, how good the Keyshawn Smiths and the Jacoby Georges and the Xavier Restrepos had looked, and you're going to be really good on paper at tight end next year with Will Mallory, who's like 40 years old now, coming back for another season. Thank goodness for that, because he had a great second half of the year, and he and Tyler Van Dyke are building special chemistry and rapport, and I think Elijah Arroyo is going to end up being a monster. So Miami is going to have an unbelievable 1-2 punch at tight end next year. They're going to have a very deep running back room because you think about all the guys that were injured this past year, and I'm not really going to miss Cam Harris all that much. So they're going to have a really deep running back room, great wide receiver core, really deep tight end core on paper. So there's going to be plenty of talent for Tyler Van Dyke to spread the football around to. But if you could get a guy like Kevin Coleman, especially if you can snatch him away from Florida State, because that's a double whammy. And listen, Florida State beat Miami last year, obviously, but Florida State has also been in the mud, right? And it's a rivalry, and Miami will want revenge next year, and they'll want to build another 4, 5, 6 game winning streak against Florida State if possible, and to take, a wide receiver like Kevin Coleman, essentially snatch him away from Florida State and bring him to Miami would be a lot of fun. So yeah, these are players we are looking for tomorrow on early National Signing Day. Some of the guys who may be on the fence. Now, I think Nigel Lee Kelly is definitely a guy. It looks almost like a sure thing. Miami is going to be able to swing him tomorrow. And a few of these other players I mentioned are battleground guys. I think, Earl Little, probably a long shot, but that would be fan-freaking-tastic to get him here. Brooklyn Rob writes in, Mario to Saban, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. That was Obi-Wan to Darth Vader. That would be unbelievable. And you know what? Nick Saban, well, I guess technically in this equation, Mario Cristobal would be the Darth Vader. But Nick Saban, Nick Saban is kind of like the Emperor. Like Nick Saban is kind of like Emperor Palpatine. And if anything, Mario Cristobal, you could maybe compare him to Darth Vader being the apprentice to the Emperor. So I could see that dynamic coming into play a little bit here. Oh my God. Going to be a lot of fun. By the way, want to let you guys know that the reason why we're on early today, and I know it really threw some people off. So hopefully you spread the word, tell people to watch the replay because the live chat is not banging the way it usually would be when we're on at 3 p.m. I think I threw you guys off with the unusual time. I will be back at 3 p.m. tomorrow. The reason why I had to swing the show early today was I got a call this morning, and I'm going to fill in for Mark Hochman today on the Hawk and Crowder show. So you guys can hear me from 2 to 6 p.m. today, co-hosting with Channing Crowder and Alejandro Solana on AM 560 in South Florida. Also 790 The Ticket, and you can listen to it on the Odyssey Sports app. So if you're looking for, if you're out of the city, if you're not a South Floridian, you want to know where to listen to it, you can get that Odyssey Sports app and hear me and former Dolphins linebacker Channing Crowder shooting the shit and having some fun from 2 until 6 p.m. today. And Alejandro Solana, who's my guy, I love Solana, he's going to be on with us as well today. So that's going to be a lot of fun. 2 to 6 p.m. I'll be on with you guys. I want to remind you, please be supporting our sponsors. And the best way you can support one of our great sponsors, come see us tomorrow night at the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill in Davie. Come see us out there in Davie tomorrow night. We're going to have a watch party to watch the Miami Heat at Philadelphia 76ers, 7 p.m. Come on out and see us in Davie. And guys, especially if you've never been to the Quarterdeck before, this should be a great time to check it out. You can meet people like me, Ethan Skolnick, Brady Hawk out there at the Quarterdeck. Enjoy some delicious food. Oh, I love the appetizers. The chicken wings, the buffalo shrimp are unfreaking believable. The fresh fish at the Quarterdeck is so good. You can build your own poke bowl. The sushi is great. The fresh mahi-mahi. The burgers and sandwiches are absolutely ridiculous. The baby back ribs are so good. So come see us tomorrow night at the Quarterdeck Davie location. But check out all the Quarterdeck locations. They have locations all over South Florida, all over Broward County. They have 2-for-1 happy hour all day, every day. You better believe I'm going to be knocking down 2-for-1 drinks tomorrow night when we're watching the Heat hopefully slam the Philadelphia 76ers 7 p.m. tomorrow at the Quarterdeck. So to check out their menu before you go or find the location nearest to you, visit quarterdeckrestaurants.com. And those who come out tomorrow night in Davie, you're going to have a chance to win $500 at this watch party. Our friends at ASX Sports are going to be out there as well. Play the ASX Sports app out there for a chance to win $500. So come out and see us. Come out and see the Quarterdeck. Come out and see ASX Sports tomorrow night. We are going to have an awesome freaking time. And hey, if you don't want to wait until tomorrow night to win some money tonight at betus.com. BetUS is the official sports book of Donno Daily. Guys, this is you're never going to turn back after you sign up at betus.com. They're in their 27th NFL season, and you don't just bet NFL at BetUS. It's a full-service sports book. You can bet on the NHL, the NBA, UFC fights, Major League Baseball, college football, international soccer. I say this and I mean it. BetUS.com. It's like having Las Vegas in your pocket. They also have a casino right there on the website. You can play blackjack for real money. I play the $1, minimum $1. If you're a high roller, go ahead and knock yourself out. But I play the minimum $1 blackjack on there at betus.com all the time. It's a full-service sports book. Yes, you can use it in Florida. Unlike that app that was recently suspended, betus.com has been around for damn near 30 years. They've never been suspended. betus.com and sign up with our code. We're going to get you the best bonus in the industry when you sign up with our code 5RSN125. They're going to give you a 125% sign-up bonus. So you make a deposit, for example, of $100 with our code 5RSN125. They're going to give you $125 on top of your deposit in free play money. Or sign up with $1,000. They're going to give you $1,250 in free play money on top of your deposit. How good is that? You bet, you win, you get paid. BetUS.com. David is asking Hawk taking lots of time off. He's a little bit of a diva. He does that. I think he's sick though. I think he's taking time off because he's sick. I've been sick and I'm not even taking time off. Actually, I did skip my show Friday because I was sick then. So that's the pot calling the kettle black. If you're sick, get well, do what you got to do. And Brooklyn Rob says they need a YouTube channel for the broadcast. I would love that. Not so much for me because I've got a face for radio. Channing Crowder is a really good looking guy, so I wouldn't mind seeing his face there on the YouTubes. But yeah, huge thank you. Huge shout out to Brady Hawk. Huge shout out to Manny Chang for doing excellent work behind the scenes as always, even though his shoes are ugly. Huge shout out to everyone in the chat. Brooklyn Rob, very active today. David, very active today. Emma White, Mr. T's Culture. Thank you so much, Marco, for being active. I will talk to you guys again tomorrow. Back to the usual time tomorrow, 3 p.m. 3 p.m. tomorrow. It's going to be an early National Signing Day palooza tomorrow, my friends. Go Canes, go Dolphins, go Heat, and go Panthers. Hope I didn't mush him there. We will talk to you guys again tomorrow on another episode of Donno Daily on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Ciao.